Last time we talked about a critical darling that, even after a second more favourable viewing, I still don't quite feel warrants that praise. And I said we flip that idea on its head, so here we are with The Awakening, with Rebecca Hall, Dominic West, Imelda Staunton and Isaac Hempstead Wright. And I really think this deserves a lot more attention and praise. Is it a kind of by-the-book ghost story? In a lot of ways, yes. Does it have unwarranted and unearned jump scares sometimes? It was made in the last decade, so of course it does. But in spite of these flaws, I still love it. A great ghost story is never about spectres rattling chains and the like. Our protagonists in these stories are not haunted by apparitions. They're often haunted by the past, whether it's something they control or not. The great ghost stories are all about grief or loss. And that's what this is. Our opening sequence even tells us, alongside the Spanish flu, World War I claims so many lives, and draws the conclusion that this is a time for ghosts. And that's what the ghost of this film is. It's World War I, more than Spanish flu and anything else. This is a film that is about people haunted by the First World War, and I love it for it. But let's delve into the story, and maybe you'll see why I harbour this love. So we meet Florence Cathcart, professional skeptic. She's written books on it. And she's breaking up a seance where they're trying to, contact people, of course, as seances do. And she's hated for it. Because a lot of people still want to speak to that person that they sent over to the front lines that one last time. Because a lot of them didn't come back. Whilst I disagree with mediumship for profit, I do think a lot of people benefit from it. It could be argued as a form of psychotherapy for some. This ability to, even if it's just make-believe, reconnect with a lost loved one. If it helps them, I'm all for it. But don't charge thousands of pounds just for an hour session. That's the bit that rankles me, and I think the bit that rankles Florence. She wants to be wrong. It's quite clear. She wants to be disproven. She wants one day to see the evidence, even after laying all the traps for the mediums to fall into. If they don't, she's won. It's like a lot of skeptics. Skeptics aren't out there going, haha, I'm going to prove you wrong. It's, okay, prove me wrong, please. If I can see this evidence, great. And I think that's the best way to be as a skeptic. Open to the possibility, but critical. And this is Florence in a nutshell. But of course she's drawn to the boarding school where a boy has died. Because of a ghost, apparently, that has cropped up in pictures for well over a decade. And this is what starts the main thrust of the story. But we meet a lot of very interesting characters who are all haunted in their own ways. We have Mr. McNair, who is carrying some kind of injury. There are a lot of horrific things that happened in the First World War that could give him a cough like that. And whatever it was, I feel for him. There's Mr. Judd, of course, who is hated as a coward, because whether through conscientious objection or simply cowardice, he found a way to avoid the front lines. And that's the sad thing. He mentions himself, these people weren't heroes. And whilst many people may disagree with that, I agree with his reasoning for that assumption. They didn't choose it. They didn't make a conscious choice of signing up. They were drafted, they were sent out there, unless they could prove that they couldn't go. Unless there was a really good reason that they shouldn't be sent out, they were gone. They had no choice. And he found a way around the system, so of course he's hated for it. Because everyone wished they found a way around the system. Nobody wanted to fight that war. I kind of believe that nobody wants to fight any war, deep down. But, at least we have voluntary military now. So those people are doing it because they feel it's right. My views on the military aside, that's their choice. And I respect that. But this wasn't a choice. These men were sent by people who were sitting in opulence, just sending these people out to die. And that's really everything you need to know about these characters. They're all shaped by that. And of course, let's not forget Robert. He's got this wound and people in his squad died and he wishes he'd joined them. But he didn't. His Spectre is that. But of course, we do have a real ghost in this, played brilliantly by Isaac Hempstead Wright. Tom is such a sympathetic character, and Maud, his mother. They're both very sympathetic characters. Everyone does a great job with their roles here. And on a second viewing, when you see little elements of the fact that Tom is not actually one of the boys at the school. You don't get too many hints towards the actual conclusion, really. But you do get a lot of hints, even as she's driving up, Mr. McNair spits. And I don't think he'd willingly spit at a boy. As much as his character's very abrasive, I don't think he'd willingly spit at a boy. But he does, and Tom has to dive out the way. Nobody else interacts with Tom throughout the whole film. In the scene in the classroom, he doesn't appear to have a book. In the flashbacks, where she's realising, he has one in front of him then, but I think that was a reshoot. I get the feeling it was a different angle anyway. So I'm not sure if he had a book, but I don't think he did. It didn't look like there was one in front of him. And there are all these little great hints that, like I say, great ghost stories do as well. They drop us little breadcrumbs, and if you can follow them, you're rewarded at the end. I mean, the whole mousy thing, was kind of one of the elements I didn't like. Apparently it's often used in German, meaning little mouse, mousy, as a little term of endearment in the same way you might say honey or sweetheart. But it was a little on the nose, Mawazi, the people in Africa called her. It was a little, yeah, you're trying to bring in this element. I almost feel like there were maybe two stories that were merged together in some ways, because that felt very much a forced element of it. But, we did get the satisfying conclusion. We got a Hollywood ending. It was quite happy, or so it seemed. The ghost was laid to rest. It's like, it's okay, Tom. I need to live my life. And then, of course, we have a twist of a knife. Maud has poisoned the sherry. They're all going to live happily ever after, or not live, but you know what I mean. They'll remain in that house together. And one of the most touching moments of the film happens there. We have this woman who has come here as a skeptic, who has been proven wrong like she wanted in so many ways. Even though there was an element of boys doing things, and of course Mr. McNair's awful mistreatment of the boy who eventually died. But indicative of the time, sadly. We have this touching moment between Tom's ghost and a dying Florence, where it's just like, I can't stay, you need to let me go, help me out here, I can feel you now, as she's closer to death. And we get a great fade, we're like, oh no, she's dead, and we're led into this thing of, the headmaster talking about, oh, she's dead, and things like that. We're not given who it is, and Florence walks past completely ignored, but of course she's fine. It was a very typical kind of twisty ending there, the fact that she's fine. But, and of course it's a happy ending, they live, she grows as a person, she's now got proof of ghosts, so she can actually go out and say, you know what, maybe they are real. But she can still slap down the fake mystics. Why not? And normally I hate the happy ending, the Hollywood ending, where the people ride off into the sunset, as it were. But I really enjoyed this. That happy ending just gave it a nice closure. People were healed through this. We see the young boy at the end, sort of tying the laces and everything, and, sort of being told it's going to be okay. We have Florence letting go of the man that she told to go away to try and save herself heartache, but it didn't quite work. We have Robert coming to terms with the fact that it wasn't his fault. This kind of thing happens in war. And so it was a good happy ending. It wasn't a forced happy ending. And that's why I say I think The Awakening deserves a lot more attention and praise. Great acting, a somewhat predictable but interesting story, but of course a massive letter of appreciation for all the people who had to deal with the aftermath of probably both world wars, let's be honest. Any massive upheaval is difficult to live through. And this sheds light on how difficult it was, how much it still affected people years after the fact. And that's great. Many people probably came out of that with terrible nightmares plaguing them for decades. And there's a certain person who thrives on nightmares, who kind of lives solely because of nightmares. So maybe we'll talk about that next time. But until then, as always, thank you for watching and take care.